This is Radio TV Phono Nut, and here's a Tele-Tone kitty record player from the mid-60s. This one is actually in pretty decent cosmetic shape, unlike most of these types, so this one might actually be worth doing a proper restoration on. As you can hear, it's humming like a son of a gun. Let's see if we get any output from the cartridge. We're definitely getting some output from the airplane, that's for sure. Yeah, the cartridge has some output. Wonder if the copyright detector will pick up on that. Alright, let's get it down here to the workbench and correct this problem. This one should be a fairly easy restoration. Tele-Tone, first choice in sound. Well, I don't know about that. They all sound about the same, but yeah, I don't know the history of Tele-Tone, but I know it goes back to the tube radio days. They actually had some tube radios and televisions. And I know at least up into the late 70s, early 80s, the name appeared on some kitty record players. I'm sure it's not the original company. Like so many others, they probably got bought out and the name slapped on lower quality stuff. And I'm also happy this has a flip type cartridge, unlike the last round of kitty 4-speed record players that it might have had 78 RPM, but they only gave you an LP needle tip. So, and I'm also glad this cartridge has output, because like we've discussed before, these flip over crystal cartridges are getting scarce and expensive. And I'm just not gonna spend that kind of money on a cartridge for a kitty record player. $8, $10, $12 maybe so, but not $50, not even $30. It's just too much. Alright, let's open it up and change the filter cap and see where we need to go from there. Here we are with the platter removed in typical 4-speed Alliance mechanism. This is real noisy and hard to turn, so this is definitely going to need to be taken apart and cleaned and re-lubricated. Here's the plastic platter, but at least they give you a metal bushing in the center of the platter. Unlike the 80s Tele-Tone record players with the plastic platter, the whole turntable's plastic on them. Unlike the Crosley Cruisers, there's no metal bushing in the center on them either. And yeah, as cheap as this record player is, it's far better than a Crosley Cruiser that's available today. Alright, let's pull it apart and see what we got to work with here. Here's the amplifier, 2 tubes, 50C5 and 35W4. I've already looked at this. The date code on the tubes is late 65, so this is probably a 66 model. Looks like a hot chassis amp, no UL marking anywhere to be found, which, you know, it shouldn't be an issue as long as you don't go poking around where you don't have any business poking. I can see here on the case that something got hot and scorched the case. Probably that big power resistor right there, so I'll try to move it out of the way a little bit where it won't come in contact quite so much with the case. Alright, let's get the amp out where I can work on it. Here's the amp. It's held on by a nut on the volume control shaft and this metal fold down thingy on the other side, which is hard to bend up. So I'm just gently bending this flap back and working on it that way. There's the old bad filter capacitor, and I think what I'm going to do is just cut the wires and mount a terminal strip there on the chassis and put our new capacitors there. Well, that takes care of the amplifier hum. But as you can tell, that drive mechanism needs some help. And there are a couple of resistors in the amp that's gone up in value. I'm going to change those just for good measure. Alright, I've got it all cleaned up and it's working properly now. Still need to shore up this motor board that's sagging. Now, like most of these types of record players, with the original type cartridge, it's not very well suited for stereo records or records with a lot of bass content because it will skip. These were primarily made for children's records, which are usually not very highly modulated, and it should do okay for old 78s, but we're going to leave it as it is. I'm not going to try to modify this for another type of cartridge. There's an old acoustic era 78, and as you can hear, it's playing it just fine. However, on a newer 78, it's having trouble with that, so most likely what's happened, the suspension in this cartridge has probably gotten hard, which is unfortunate because the thing has plenty of output. Alright, there we are. I have the motor board shored up, so the turntable sits more evenly now. It doesn't lean over to one side and drag on the motor board. That's a common problem with these cheapy cardboard case kitty record players, and even some of the ones with a wooden motor board have the same issue. I mean, after all, these things, when these were built, nobody ever envisioned that they would still be around 50 or 60 years later. These were basically this was your Crosley Cruiser of the 1960s. It was made to be used a few years. They figured 5 or 6 years use, the kid would have been done either torn it up or outgrown it, and by that time it would have been ready for the trash anyway. So, but yeah, this is still built better than a Crosley Cruiser. At least it's fixable. And like I said in the past, we just use old pieces of junk that we have on hand to accomplish this. In this case, I used the original filter capacitor that came out of here and an old cassette tape housing, and that was provided enough thickness to bring this motor board up, and that should do fine. Here's one of the 16 RPM Seaberg background music records. These are not in good shape. As you can tell, it's playing that one without skipping.
It got as far as the door when the clerk said, "Oh, by the way,
Talking book record, 16 RPM.
Underfoot, on stage particular.
Playing it okay.
Thank you, I'll be careful. The old was covered over, but that was some time ago.
Your eyes give the answer I'm...
Here's a 45 from probably the early to mid-50s, and it's playing it okay. That was before 45s really got, shall we say, louder. And I mean the later highly modulated records, these 3-volt crystal cartridges they just don't have the ability to track them, especially when the cartridges age a little bit like this one has.
I can see this is the real thrill of a lifetime.
Older 78 from probably the late 30s, early 40s, and it's playing it okay, but that rock and roll 78 was just too much for it.
Got to catch a fish and I'll think the write you a letter on thin line notepaper in a tree edition when you buy it too.
From the closet and slowly turn the page. Carefully fix up the crumbling.
And it played those selections without skipping. But yeah, I could put a modern cartridge in here, add a preamp stage, do all that, and make this thing play virtually any records you throw at it without skipping. But at the end of the day, I'd still have if I'm lucky, a cheap kitty record player that might bring $35, might bring more, I don't know, but you know, you just have to realize it is what it is. This was never meant for hi-fi music reproduction. It was meant for playing spoken word, kiddie records. You know, you could probably get away with playing your older mono 45s from the 50s on it. But if somebody wants something that's capable of better quality music reproduction, then they probably should invest in a better quality phonograph to begin with. This here is strictly for basically nostalgia. You know, this is not anything that I'm going to play my prized records on. In fact, it's probably going up for sale. So if you want to buy this, look in the video description and see if there's a link there. If there's a link there, then I want to sell this. But really, the only reason I even wasted my time with this is because the case was in decent shape. I know in the past how many have I fixed? About 3 of them that I resurrected that were pretty ragged out, and sold all of them. So hopefully I can get rid of this one too. But since it's in better shape, it ought to be worth a few more dollars. And the fact is, I've got a few more dollars tied up in this, so I'm going to have to get a few more dollars out of it to get my investment back, and that's really all I want. This is Radio TV Phononut, and you might recall the last video I did on this Tele-Tone record player. Well, after watching the video, I did something really careless and stupid. I forgot to show you the finished repair. So you have no way of knowing if I fix this thing properly or not. So let's open it up and look at the chassis. And here we go. New filter capacitors mounted on terminal strips and a couple of resistors replaced. That's the way it's supposed to be done. And that old filter cap that we're using to shore up the motor board, because these old cardboard motor boards always warp and sag and have to be shored up. And now I'm going to change this needle. We have a brand new Fansteel 700 S1, which is a 1mm sapphire LP needle. The old one works, but it might sound a little better with a new needle. And you're probably asking, why are you going with sapphire? Why don't you go with diamond? Well, diamond costs more, and for something that's probably going to be used as infrequently as this kitty record player, a sapphire needle will do just fine. And also, I think sapphire is better in these types of record players. I've heard that the diamond needles, because they're a harder material, tend to cut into the records more. I don't know how true that is, but anyway, at any rate, we're going with a sapphire 1mm needle for this. And I'd stuck another old filter capacitor under here to even this up. Tone arm was kind of sagging a little bit, but the filter capacitor's in here tight enough where it's not going to jar loose, so this thing ought to be about good to go now. Now, I was feeling generous after the other video. I listed this thing on eBay for a buy it now price of $35, which, after figuring it up, is about what I had in it after buying it and replacing parts. Those terminal strips are not cheap. Capacitors cost money. Resistors cost money. The rubber motor mounts cost money. And I think for the work that was done, and given this thing's in relatively decent cosmetic shape, $35 was a more than fair price, especially when you consider all the other junk that people have on eBay that don't even work, and certainly hasn't been serviced, that they often want more money for, and sometimes people actually bid on it. But I let this stay up for 2 days for a buy it now price of $35, and all I got was 11 watchers and 357 lookers. And really, on a buy it now listing, there's no point in letting it stay up longer than a couple of days, because in the case of record players, the decent ones are just going to get buried under all the Chinese Crosley and Victrola garbage that's so popular on eBay. And I think that's another thing that's hurting the vintage record player sales. You know, people see they can buy a new Crosley Cruiser for $49.95, and they think, well, why would I pay him $35 for that old thing when I can get a new Crosley Cruiser that has Bluetooth on it for $39 or $49? Well, I don't even try to argue with people on that anymore. I used to try to reason with them, but you can't reason with them. They've got it in their head that this new crap is better, and if that's what they want, let them buy it. And if this goes back on eBay, it's not going to be a buy it now this time. It's going to be auction style, and it's going to be more than $35, since we're including a new needle in this with this thing. That, by the way, that is something I had to buy too. It wasn't given to me. You know, I was sitting here thinking about something that happened whenever I was in my late teens. Some old guy brought by a similar looking record player to this one. I think his was a Tele-Tone, and he proceeds to tell me his tale of woe on it. Oh, I bought this for $85 at an antique store because I needed something to play my 78s, and it don't work. Well, my first thought was, well, you're an idiot for paying $85 for a cardboard cased kitty record player without even checking it first. So, tried to help the guy out. Everything that could be wrong was wrong. The output transformer was bad, the cartridge was bad, the idler wheel was bad, and I was going to fix the thing pretty much for what the cost of the parts were, which were a lot cheaper back in the 90s. Oh, he threw a fit. Claimed I was ripping him off and he wasn't going to put that much money into it. Well, then I tried to sell him a little all-in-one stereo I'd fixed up that had a 3-speed BSR changer and a pair of speakers. I was going to let him have that for $35. Oh, no, that's highway robbery. Well, I generally don't get rude with people, but I more or less showed him the door. It's like, you know, you can go out and pay $85 for some piece of crap that doesn't even work, but yet you come over here and think my prices are too high for something that does work for a lot less money. So, you know, take your piece of crap Tele-Tone record player and get out of here. I can't help you. Alright, there's the new needle. There's the old one. It's one of those fork needles that slide under a little set screw. They're a bit of a pain in the butt to change, but that's what the majority of these kitty type record players use. So, let's fire it up and see what it does.
So much has changed. It was songs of love that I would sing to them.
Okay, I believe that does sound better.
Housewife who gave up the good life for me. The photograph album.
Here's a 16 RPM record that I didn't get centered very well on the turntable platter. One of those for the Seaberg background music system. I would only suggest playing mono records on this, since it has a mono stylus. I could have replaced it with a 0.7 mil stereo stylus, but This cartridge is not very stereo compliant, so 0.7 mil would probably do more harm than 1 mil would. So I'd stick to old beat up records, and I probably wouldn't play styrene 45s on this unless they're already worn out.
Thanks. Jolly good luck.
16 RPM talking book. 78. The 78 needle is original. I don't have one of those to replace, but it seems to still be good, so there you go. Like I said, if I put this back on eBay, it's going to be auctioned, and it's going to be a higher price to reflect the cost of the needle. And if a fully serviced record player that's in decent cosmetic shape isn't worth what I'm asking, then I might as well just throw the darn thing in the trash, which may be what happens to it. Alright, there you go. More to come later.